Once upon a time, there lived a girl called Nicky, who always took good care of her friends. The people she cared about most, though, were those who had fought to defend Britain and the freedoms the British people enjoy. Every year, towards the end of October, she proudly joined the army of people who stand out in all weathers selling poppies to collect money for the Royal British Legion. One year, she read an article I'd written about the fate of some Czech soldiers who'd been trained by the Special Operations Executive in Britain during World War II. An idea was born, and she bought and posted a package of poppies for me to leave at their memorials. In fact, in this part of the Czech Republic, there are memorials to many more people who fought the Nazis than just the S.O.E. teams. From the day Czechoslovakia was given to Hitler to ensure peace in their time, ordinary civilians resisted in any way they could. Tens of thousands of them paid with their lives. I decided to take Nicky's poppies to the memorials of people who could have kept quiet and stayed safe, but chose to fight instead. After all, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. So this is the story of Nicky's poppies, and the stories of the people whose memorials I left them at. And it's also part of the story of Nicky, because as kind and caring as she was to her friends, life was not kind to her. And in the end, she took far greater care of others than she did of herself. Józef Bieski, Operation Wolfram. The first memorial lies deep in the forests on the slopes of Smrk, the second highest mountain in the Beskidi Range. It commemorates a man named Józef Buck Bieski, the supply officer of Operation Wolfram. The memorial stone which used to be there reads, "On this spot, Lieutenant Józef Bieski laid down his life for the freedom of his homeland. 1910-1944. Parachute Group Wolfram. Honor to his memory." The year after I took this photo, this memorial stone had disappeared. It may have been removed because of perceived inaccuracies. Józef Bieski was a corporal at the time of his death, but was promoted posthumously to lieutenant. He was actually murdered by another Czech, a career criminal named Stanislav Kotačka. Kotačka was wanted by the German police for robbery and joined up with Wolfram to escape. In an argument, he shot and robbed Bieski. So technically Bieski was not killed in battle with the enemy he'd come to fight, and someone may have taken issue with the statement that he'd laid down his life for the freedom of his homeland. Parachute Group Wolfram dropped into occupied Czechoslovakia on the night of 13th to 14th September 1944. They trained in England with a Special Operations Executive, and their mission was to organise sabotage and resistance operations, as well as acting as a radio link to London for other parachute groups operating in the area. They were inserted in 2 drops and widely dispersed by the wind, losing their radio in the process. The operator, Corporal Karel Svoboda, was captured by the Gestapo, but refused to cooperate in radio deception. He was sent to Flossenburg concentration camp, where he ultimately survived the war. Svoboda was originally assigned to Operation Anthropoid, but was injured during parachute training and replaced by Jan Kubiš. Although Wolfram met up with the Jan Žižka Partisan Brigade, which was trained and inserted by the Red Army, and regained contact with London, they never succeeded with their mission. Undermanned, under-equipped, and with no food supply in the winter of 1944-45, they were forced to shelter with the family of one of their members until March 1945. They then moved to another part of the country and finally linked up with the Red Army. Jaroslav Schwarz, Operation Tin. Our next memorial can be found on one of the infantry blockhouses which were built by the Czechs when Hitler came to power. They knew that eventually he would invade them, so they planned a string of border fortifications modelled on the French Maginot Line. The system was unfinished by the time of the Munich Treaty in 1938, which effectively handed Hitler a copy of the Maginot Line to train his troops on before he invaded France. The blockhouses are codenamed according to their location. In this picture we can see MOS 19 Alley, which means Moravian-Ostrava section, blockhouse 19. Alley refers to the alley of trees beside it, and was a code name used to avoid naming it directly in communications. Today it's a museum and restored to the condition it was in when it was built. It deserves a video all of its own, and it's well worth a visit. But if you look along the tank trap into the trees, you'll see a smaller, less restored blockhouse called MOS 18. It's used by the museum as storage space and isn't open to the public. However, if you take a wander up there and look in through the gate across the entrance, you'll see a bronze plaque on the wall, which reads, "In memory of Lieutenant Jaroslav Schwarz, commander of Blockhouse MOS 18 Obora in 1938, born 11th of May 1914 in Velký Újezd by Olomouc. Serviceman in the Czechoslovak Army in England. Member of Parachute Group TIN. Fell 18th June 1942 in battle with the German forces of occupation in the Church of St. Cyril and Methodius in Reslova Street in Prague. Unveiled on the 21st of May 1994 by the 2nd Army Group, General Staff of the Army of the Czech Republic in Olomouc and the Silesian Provincial Museum in Opava." In 1938, Schwarz was a corporal assigned to MOS 18. After the Munich Treaty and the occupation of Czechoslovakia, Corporal Schwarz escaped via Slovakia, Hungary and Yugoslavia to France. There he enlisted in the Czechoslovak Foreign Army and took part in the fighting before the fall of France. After France fell in 1940, he escaped to England and joined the Free Czechoslovak Army in Britain. On the night of the 29th to 30th of April 1942, he returned to his homeland by parachute as part of Operation TIN. TIN ran parallel to Operation Anthropoid and targeted a man named Emanuel Moravec. He was the Minister of Education in the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and had become a symbol of betrayal and collaboration. TIN was unsuccessful, and after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich by Operation Anthropoid, Schwarz went into hiding in the crypt of the Church of St. Cyril and Methodius with members of Anthropoid and several other S.O.E. groups. They were betrayed, and on June 18, 1942, the Gestapo arrived with 700 troops. The soldiers fought a 2-hour gun battle as they tried to tunnel into the nearby sewer system. Soon, though, the Gestapo began flooding the crypt with fire hoses, and the surviving soldiers realized that they couldn't escape. Jaroslav Schwarz, Josef Gabčík of Anthropoid, Josef Valčík of Silver A, and Jan Hruby of Bioscope shot themselves to avoid capture. If you ever visit Prague, take a walk to the church. There's a permanent memorial exhibition there, the National Monument to the Heroes of the Heydrich Terror. In October 1945, Schwarz was posthumously promoted to lieutenant. Recently, I learned that part of the graduation ceremony for soldiers who pass Czech Army Commando selection takes place in this crypt, in honor of the first Czech commandos. First Lieutenant Schmidt, U.S. Army Air Force. Now let's take a walk to the village of Kiovice, a few kilometers west of Ostrava. There, in a hedge on a street so small it doesn't even have a name, you find this block of black stone. The inscription on it reads, "On Dubska Hill, 170 meters from the spot height at 397 meters above sea level, in a Mustang P-51B, fell United States Army Air Force fighter pilot First Lieutenant Howard S. Schmidt. Born 30th of September 1923, Verona, Wisconsin. Died 17th of October 1944. Buried on 19th of October 1944 in Kiovice. 27th of August 1946, exhumed and buried in Lorraine Saint-Avold in Paris. From his sacrifice, our freedom." Schmidt flew his Mustang, named Irish Lassie, with the 309th Fighter Squadron of the 31st Fighter Group based in San Severo, Italy. Shortly after he left America for Europe, his wife gave birth to a daughter. On the day he died, he was flying as an escort for B-17 Flying Fortresses, which were on a mission to bomb the oil refineries at Blechhammer in Silesia. Blechhammer today is Blachownia in southern Poland. It's likely that his oxygen system failed and he lost consciousness, diving at high speed into the ground. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Herbert K. Garlock, followed him down. The airspeed of both aircraft far exceeded their design limits and they broke apart. Schmidt's body was found 120 meters from the wreck of his aircraft. Garlock fell clear of the wreckage of his aircraft and managed to open his parachute. He injured his leg in the landing, was captured, and after hospital treatment was held as a prisoner of war. He survived and returned to America after the war. The Scouts of Ostrava. Partway up Lisa Hora, the highest peak in the Beskidi Mountains, there is a cairn of stones and a memorial to 5 scouts from Ostrava who were shot by the Gestapo for helping partisans with maps, food and medical supplies in 1945. Vladimir Chermak, the leader of the first Ostrava scout group, was just 19 when he founded the Silesian Youth Resistance Movement. By 1939, they were already helping people escape from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia over the mountains into Poland. By 1940, they were in contact with other Czechoslovak resistance groups, and after the Nazis banned scouting, their numbers rose to around 400. By April 1945, they'd collected enough weapons to start partisan warfare, and adopted the name Silesian Heroes Resistance. They were supporting the 1st Jan Žižka partisan brigade, who I mentioned earlier, when they were betrayed, and 85 members were arrested. On April 24, 1945, the feast day of St. George, the patron saint of Scouts, 18 members of the resistance were taken to the old Jewish cemetery in Szczecin, Poland, shot in the back of the head, and dumped in a mass grave. On October 6, 1945, Scouts from Ostrava erected a wooden cross at Ivanchena in memory of their friends. Over the years, visiting Scouts built up a cairn of stones, and the memorial grew. During the communist regime, Ivanchena became a symbol of resistance against totalitarianism. At one point, secret police hid in the forests, making notes about who visited the area. They even searched hikers' rucksacks, confiscating rocks which people wanted to add to the cairn. Today, the site has been reorganized into terraces of stones. It's a place of pilgrimage for Scouts on the weekends around April 24th, and on the edge of the terraces, you can see this memorial stone, inscribed with the words, "In eternal memory of 5 Ostrava Scouts and all Scouts who have fallen in the service of their homeland." Since October 1946, Scouts, hikers and other visitors have built up the cairn on Ivanchena with stones they have carried up. The brothers. Vladimir Chermak, born 1919. Vladimir Pach, born 1921. Otto Klein, born 1921. Kvido Niemec, born 1922. Milan Rotter, born 1926, were murdered by the German occupation forces for their resistance activities on April 24th, 1945, in Szczecin. I said at the beginning of this project that I wanted to visit memorials to those who chose to fight when they could have kept their heads down and perhaps stayed safe. Józef Bierski and Jaroslav Schwarz were professional soldiers who had joined the Free Czechoslovak Army in England, but they didn't have to volunteer for special operations duty. First Lieutenant Schmidt joined the US Army Air Force when America was still at peace, but he did so out of choice. All of them received first-class military training and the best available weapons and support from nation-states. The Scouts, on the other hand, were civilians who brought food and information to partisans operating in the mountains. They had no training, no backup, and no uniforms to maybe offer them protection as prisoners of war. They must have known exactly what would happen to them if they were caught, but they went ahead and did it anyway. The Railwaymen of Frýdek-Místek. More acts of civilian resistance are commemorated at the railway station in Frýdek-Místek, a town on the plain beneath the Beskedy Mountains. Under occupation, 1939 to 1945, and in the May Resistance of 1945, these employees of the railway laid down their lives for their homeland. Alina, Józef. Bednářik, Zdeněk. Hasalík, Josef. Hrňa, Jaroslav. Janečka, Ferdinand. Kuběnský, Josef. Mikuláš, Josef. Mohyla, Robert. Piterák, Antonín. Richter, František. Škola, Miroslav. Honor to their memory. The small brass plaque added to the bottom of the memorial is dedicated to Egger, Victor, senior official, train drivers. Born 28th of October 1883, Nový Hrozenkov. Died, exact date unknown, September 1942, Malý Trostinec, Belarus. Malý Trostinec was an extermination camp not far from Minsk. A friend of mine showed me this memorial because his great-uncle's name is on it. His grandfather was also involved and survived being sent to a concentration camp, as well as a death march at the end of the war. Apparently, he never spoke of his experiences to his family, so I don't know exactly what happened. All my friend knows is that they were fairly senior managers of the railway, and he thinks they might have been misdirecting Nazi trains. The May Resistance, or May Uprising, of 1945 happened as the German army began to collapse under the onslaught of the Red Army. The Germans tried to make the territory of Moravia and Bohemia into a stronghold to break the Russian advance, and were desperately trying to move weapons, materials, and men for the defense of Germany, mostly by rail. They embarked on a program of mass murder to intimidate Czechs and stop them interfering. An estimated 8,000 to 10,000 Czech civilians were killed during this period for acts of resistance ranging from flying Czech flags to taking up arms against the Germans. Some sources say these numbers are only those killed by the Germans. Others say they include those killed by bombs and artillery from American and Russian forces, but they certainly include many thousands who actively rose up and fought the Nazi occupation of their home in any way they could. Among the names on the memorial, I've uncovered a few whose details survive in online archives. Zdeněk Bednářik, for example, is described as a trackmaster, which is an obsolete position now described as either a track engineer or a transport route manager. I couldn't find any details of why he was arrested, but he died on the 14th of March, 1943, in Auschwitz concentration camp. Josef Alina was arrested on October 6, 1941, for working with the Moravian-5 resistance organization. He was convicted on January 13, 1942, by a military court in Brno for disturbing public order and security and for preparing high treason, punishable by death and forfeiture of all property. He died on the 7th of May, 1942, in Mauthausen concentration camp. Józef Kuběnský was a train conductor arrested on December 13, 1939, for distributing leaflets. He died on January 2, 1943, at Dachau concentration camp. The thing that struck me when I started looking for memorials to leave Nicky's Poppies on was the sheer number of them in this area alone. Whenever I visit other parts of the country, I see a similar picture, and this is probably true across all the parts of Europe occupied by the Nazis. Hitler began his assault on the world around him by sending 20,000 troops into the Rhineland, demilitarized zone, a violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and a probe. What are you going to do about it? The German military wasn't prepared for war, and their commanders had strict orders to withdraw if the French or British intervened. The lack of response to this act convinced Hitler that France and Britain wouldn't stand in the way of his other plans. It led to a war which cost the lives of some 15 to 20 million people across Europe. Unfortunately, as long as there are nations which can't adapt to peace, the rest of us will need armed forces to protect us. And as long as we need armed forces, their service will put them in the way of physical and mental harm. And as long as that continues, we will need people like Nicky, people who care and do what they can to help those who help us.